Okay, understanding parabolas and how do we graph them. There's different forms of the quadratic that a quadratic equation can be written in. One is the standard form. And that standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals y. Sometimes this might be f of x, or it might be 0. It might be f of x equals or 0 equals. It's still standard form. Okay, an example of that could be y equals 2x squared minus 4x plus 1. So there's an example of what that could look like. The next form that we are looking at is vertex form. That's another form. And vertex form looks like this. Y equals, and the y on this could be on this side. It doesn't really matter. I'm putting it on either side so that you can see it doesn't really matter which side it's on. So y equals a times the quantity x minus h squared plus k. And some textbooks use different letters than h and k, but those tell you something about the graph, and we'll get to that later. Example of that form could be y equals 2 times the quantity x minus 3 squared minus 5. And then the last form that we're looking at is intercept form. intercept. And that looks like this. Y equals a, and you have two binomial factors, x minus p and x minus q. And again, some textbooks might use different letters than p and q. Those are actually representing some value. And an example of that, y equals negative 4 times x minus, or x plus 1 times x minus 3. So those are examples of each of those forms. We're going to talk about how the graphs look and what we know about the different graphs. Each of these forms help you to be able to graph them. Vertex form and intercept form are much easier to graph, I think, than standard form, because these are kind of what I would call graphing ready form, because looking at the form of the equation, you can identify points that are on that graph right away. Okay, so how does it open? How does the graph open? It's either going to open up or it's going to open down. So if it looks like this, I'm just going to cross off this number here, it's in the way. Okay, so it's either going to look like this, where it opens up because it is positive, meaning a is equal to a positive number, or it's going to open down because it has a negative orientation, because our value for a is equal to a negative number. Okay, so if a is a positive number, it opens up. If a is a negative number, it opens down. So orientation tells you the direction that the graph is opening. Your vertex. Your vertex is an ordered pair. Some value for x, some value for y. It is an ordered pair. It's really important that when I ask you what the vertex is, that you write it with as a coordinate. It is a point. It is that lowest point or that highest point on your graph. When your graph opens this way, there's a low point. And that low point, sorry, my dogs. Hold on, let me quiet. So there is a lowest point when there's a minimum, and that lowest point is right here. There is, when there is a maximum, the graph looks like this, and that highest point is your maximum. Okay, so there's a minimum and a maximum. So this is our maximum. This here would be our minimum. That's the vertex point. That's the ordered pair. All right, axis of symmetry. When you have a parabola, sometimes this is called a line of symmetry as well. So it could be a line of symmetry, and I usually abbreviate that as LOS or AOS, axis of symmetry or line of symmetry. What that is referring to is wherever that vertex is, you can take a vertical line and draw it right down the middle. My graph doesn't look very good. It's not convincing. Let's see if I can convince you a little bit more. There. So that half of it, if I was to take that graph and I was to take one half and fold it over that axis of symmetry, it would meet point to point because they are symmetric. Okay? So what this does is it divides the parabola into two parts that are equal, or two equal parts. There is an equation to figure out what that axis of symmetry is, and that equation will always be x equals some number, and that number is whatever the x coordinate is of that vertex. So if the x coordinate for that vertex was -2, 7, then your line of symmetry or axis of symmetry would be x equals -2. All right, domain and range. We kind of talked about that already. The domain are all the values for x that fit the graph. Okay, so what are all the possible values for x that fit the graph? In this case, it's going to be x is equal to all real numbers, because our graph goes on forever to the left and forever to the right. For our range, it's a little bit different. These, again, it's still all values for y that fit the graph. So all the values for y that are on that graph. In this case, depending on if it has a minimum, meaning the orientation is positive, or it has a maximum, meaning the orientation is negative, will determine if it y is greater than or equal to some number, or is it y is less than or equal to some number. It's going to be some form. If it's greater than, it's because there's a minimum. If it's less than, that means that there's a maximum because of the orientation. So those are just some things that will kind of help you think about identifying parts of this graph. So I gave you two examples of graphs, and I want you to be able to identify all of this information. So let me make this bigger so that you can see it for those of you that may not have got a chance to print this out. You can always take a screenshot and copy it down on your paper later. So orientation, based on what we talked about orientation, is there a positive or a negative orientation? The ends are going up. If you think of going up and going in the positive direction, the orientation for this is positive. The vertex, that is this point right here. What are the coordinates for that vertex? It is an ordered pair, so we're going to have parentheses, and we're going to list the x coordinate first and then the y coordinate. So -1, +1. The minimum, or is there a maximum? Is there a top or is there a bottom? There's a bottom. So the bottom means it only can go this low. That's as low as it can go. So there is a minimum. Your axis of symmetry or line of symmetry is going to be x equals some number. And what we're doing is we're saying we're going to go and we can split this right through here. And that line, x equals this here. And the other place you can get that, this value that we're trying to figure out that goes here, is the same as your x coordinate of your vertex. So that is going to be x equals -1. It matches the x coordinate of your vertex. Domain, this goes forever. So it's x equals all real numbers. And for my range, it only can go this low. So it can't go any lower. My ruler. Oh, here it is. This is as low as it can go. So as low as it can go is 1. So our y is equal to 1 and everything above that. So greater than or equal to 1. Oops, I wrote that backwards, didn't I? Sure did. So it's equal to 1 and it's greater than 1. The other thing I want you to notice is that our value that I got for my range, this 1 right here, is going to match the 1 right there. So your vertex gives you a couple of things. It gives you it helps you with your line of symmetry or axis of symmetry. It also helps you with your range. What is that minimum or maximum point? So in terms of this, the minimum is 1. Y equals 1. That's as low as it can go. All right, I have another example. I'd like for you to figure out what those are. And then write them on your paper, and then I want you to put that in the group chat just to me, not to everyone, just to me. So don't do it until you have all of the answers. So I want you to put A, write that on your paper, B, write that on your paper. Then once you have A through F, put that in the group chat so I can see that you understand this. And I will show you the answer in a minute. So looking at this, the orientation is opening down, so it has a negative orientation. The vertex is at this coordinate, which is 2, 3. Some of you wrote your answer like this, which I don't know why. So some of you wrote your answer like this for the vertex. You need to have it as an ordered pair. The next one, the minimum or maximum, there's a top to it, so there is a maximum. Axis of symmetry, that would be this line that goes right down the middle. X equals, and it's going to match this 2 right here. So x equals 2. Domain is all real numbers. And my range, y is equal to this 3. That's as high as it goes. And then everything below that, so it's less than or equal to 3. And those are the notes